So I will begin. Dear friends, Monica, Iris, Ivo, Albrecht, and Frau Wippermann, all my colleagues and students and friends, dear everyone, online and offline, welcome to the 4th season of Sinophone Classicism lecture series, which was launched in the winter semester 2021 to 22 to audience online and offline in Germany and beyond. Some of you might have even noticed that the poster design is not shown at this moment, but the poster design of this year features an artwork by Lei Xue, who too gave a talk in our series last winter. So this, among other signs, convinced me that we are creating some synergy here through the collaboration of many scholars as well as practicing artists around the globe. So your support, dear audience, is of course vital to our modest success. This semester, we are welcoming 3 excellent speakers, beginning today with Professor Mingwei Song from Wellesley College, USA, to be followed by Fangdai Chen from Lingnan University, Hong Kong, and Barbara Mittler from Heidelberg University. Without exaggeration, Professor Song is becoming the most important voice in the research on modern and contemporary Chinese fictions. He received his BA from Shandong University in 1995 and a Master MA from Fudan University in 1998. He studied at Columbia University with Professor David Derby Wang, another old friend of our lecture series, and received his PhD in 2005. He has been teaching at Wellesley College in the last 16 years, currently serving as the chair of the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures. He has received many grants and prizes, of which I'm most amused to find the Excellent College Textbook Prize issued by the Chinese Ministry of Education in 2002 for co-authoring a history of contemporary Chinese literature, 当代文学史教程, published by Fudan University Press in 1999. I kind of wonder if I have used a textbook when I was in college. So it serves as a token showing how precocious and prolific Mingwei has been ever since he was a student in China. His first book was a biography on Eileen Chan, or Zhang Ailing, published in 1998, which was written during his senior year as a bachelor student. Altogether, he has published 7 books in Chinese, 2 monographs in English, which I will talk about in a minute, dozens of edited volumes and special issues in English and in Chinese, and such a long list of articles and essays that I have stopped counting. He's also a translator and a poet, with a poetry anthology co-authored with a Taiwanese writer, Luo Yijun, titled White Horse and a Black Camel, 白马与黑骆驼, that came out last year. As I just mentioned, Mingwei began his study in Chinese literature with canonical 20th century writers such as Zhang Ailing, Mao Dun, and Ba Jing. His first English monograph, Young China, National Rejuvenation and the Bildungsroman, 1900 to 1959, published by Harvard University Asia Center, 2015, investigates how youth was taken as a central literary motif in novels of this period, and how that was profoundly related to ideas of nationhood and modernity. In the last few years, however, his focus is being shifted to contemporary Chinese science fiction. An anthology that he published in 2018 titled The Reincarnated Giant includes 14 short stories and a novel excerpts from representative works by new wave science fiction writers such as Liu Cixin, Han Song, and Chen Qiufan. Some of them, especially Liu Cixin, has now become a household name in contemporary global literature. This anthology is crucial in elevating the popularity as well as register of Chinese science fictions among the public and academia alike. His second English monograph, titled Fear of Seeing, Toward a Poetics of Chinese Science Fiction, will come out this year with Columbia University Press. I am highly looking forward to this book, not only because its title promises me that it's about poetics. You said the poetics of Chinese science fiction.
Actually, the publisher removed the word. It's now called apoetics.
Oops.
It's no longer toward. They said
I see, the poetics.
poetics.
I see, that's even better.
Apoetics, yeah.
Yeah, but also because many of my German students will enjoy reading it too, since science fiction is truly a genre transcending national and linguistic borders. I'm so glad that Mingwei has generously agreed to contribute a lecture to our series with a theme that is highly relevant to our discussion on Sinophone Classicism. Without further ado, Mingwei, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zhiyi. Thank you so much for such a very generous introduction. Thank you, the Institute for Advanced Study here, and thank you all coming. I know you all need to climb the hill like I just did, coming up here. And thank you. I know there are people watching it online. Thank you, wherever you are, for tuning in. Yes, I have been researching on Chinese science fiction for a long time. Interestingly, when Zhiyi invited me to give a talk, I gave her usually what I just wrote. So it's a very new, the non-binary stuff, non-binary science fiction. Then she reminded me that this is a classical Sinophone Classicism. Okay, that really got me. So how could I make science fiction a genre that's about the future fit into this series? Okay, I have some very superficial answers. First gave some superficial answers. Okay, I want to ask you, do you know about Liu Cixin, this name? Or Cixin Liu? Only a few know about him. Okay. So I should, basically I should tell you something that perhaps is not like familiar knowledge. I think I was perhaps the first person who came to Germany to mention Liu Cixin. It's really a long time ago, at the Einstein Forum in Berlin and Potsdam. Liu Cixin later became truly an international phenomenon. He's the first non-English writer to win the Hugo Award, the big Hugo Award. The Hugo Award was dominated by English language writers for 75 years. And Liu Cixin was the first writer who broke that record. And he also won, I think, as the first non-German writer to win a similar award that was awarded to German genre writers, and also in Spanish. So he's like an international storm. For a little while, because of his fame, I was often invited to talk about him. I was traveling all over the world. At every airport, I saw his books there. So that means he's really popular. People grab his book to read and on the international long-distance flight. So let's just start with Liu Cixin, because Liu Cixin was like the most important figure who revived this genre, and created what I call the new wave, a new wave of Chinese science fiction with a very distinct new style, a new experiment with both thinking and writing. So when you ask me, when Zhiyi asked me to talk about something about the classicism in Chinese science fiction, what immediately jumped into my mind is actually Liu Cixin wrote a short story in 2002, that short story is 100% about classicism. The title of the short story was the title that I chose for the 2018 Columbia Anthology, the Poetry Claude. It's called 诗云, the Poetry Claude. 诗云is not like according to the song of the classic of song, not that 诗云, but a cloud of poetry. And the cloud is a virtue, so it's a virtual cloud of poetry. That was 20 years ago. Before we have, before we were familiar with, the cloud, that whatever we use, a computer, that kind of cloud. So Liu Cixin, as a computer scientist, he created this story is very funny. I thought it's very funny, so I had it translated into English in 2011, and first published it in Hong Kong, and then later included in the 2018 Columbia Anthology. And I told him it's a very thick anthology. I wanted to name it the Poetry Cloud, just like my title Toward the Poetics was later removed. The Toward was taken off by the editor. That book also, the title was also changed because they thought this book is science fiction. If you call it a Poetry Cloud, people will think it's about poetry. So they took out the classicism from it. So that book was eventually called The Reincarnated Giant, which is actually a story about a story of irony. It's about the giant, but the giant was actually like a symbolic of China, symbolic of a nation growing on fast speed. But eventually that giant cannot really, his growth cannot be stopped. So he eventually died because of his tremendous frame. He died. Okay, that title was okay. That made the book kind of selling pretty well. I could still get some royalties every year for that book. That means they made the right decision by changing the title. But still, Poetry Cloud is really one of my favorite stories written by Liu Cixin, who was very, very in his early career before he wrote the three-body trilogy. Okay, the Poetry Cloud, it's about, no, actually, still not. I know when I need to turn to it. Yeah, okay. The Poetry Cloud is about, okay, I'll give you the gist of the story. Storytelling part is always very fun. It's about, okay, we thought we are a very advanced civilization, but no, we are like a very low-level species in the universe. So one day, super powerful, intelligent creatures descended on Earth, and they are shapeless, and they appeared in front of the humans as a perfect circle, just all a shape, like any shape. So like it's like basically geometry. It's kind of like a geometrical shape, perfect. And this super intelligent creature thought the human intelligence was nothing. It's just so low, dirty. So he destroyed the human race, and every life on Earth was destroyed. Okay, but he found something eventually when he was scanning the Earth. He found something. Somehow, he found something that he could not understand. Something called poetry. He could not understand poetry, and particularly the tongue poetry. Okay, that's classicism. He could not understand, say, 长河, 黄河, 白日依山尽, 黄河入海流. He could not understand 此中有真意，欲辨已忘言。He could not understand all these very strange combination of the words which added up to something surreal, and he could not understand it according to his pure rational thinking. So eventually, for that reason, he kept one Chinese poet who actually wrote vernacular Chinese. But now, for the sake of survival, this is very funny. So this modernist poet who always wrote vernacular, now he only told this super intelligent alien creature stories about classical Chinese poetry. Because that if he just gave him like 两只黄蝴蝶忽然飞上天, that's too easy to understand, right? Or even 再别康桥轻轻地我走了, it's too easy. So he had to give him all the difficult poems from Qu Yuan, from Shi Jing, that even today scholars could not fully interpret. So that really got this super intelligent creature hooked to, fascinated by classical Chinese poetry. Then one day he decided, okay, I must learn this because I lived like a billion lives, billion lifespans of the humans. But you very fiercely, he's obviously very kind of like arrogant, consider the human being fiercely creatures. But you created something that I could not understand. So eventually he decided to learn to understand. So he became a student of classical Chinese poetry, trying to understand classical Chinese poetry. And after he learned some basic skills, he decided, okay, he's going to become the greatest, he decided to become the greatest classical Chinese poet. So he called himself Li Bai. So from now on, this super intelligent creature had a name called Li Bai. Okay. So eventually, over a long time, he exhausted all the energies of the solar system. Every atom was used up, and he turned everything into a cloud. And this cloud is not a cloud, but it's a database. It's a poetry cloud, poetry cloud as a database. I have a description, but I don't think I need to read it. It's too long. But this, he described this poetry cloud as if it's really there. Liu Cixin. He described it in the language which we call the science fictional discourse, which is literal, which is technical, which is not poetic at all. In science fiction, metaphor usually collapse into literal meanings. Things like he's observed by the landscape. It's a metaphorical use of a language, but in science fiction, he's observed by the landscape. That means the landscape is man-eating, carnival, kind of the landscape observed me. It's very scary in science fiction. Her world exploded. It's a metaphor to say a young woman's life may be very messy today. But in science fiction, it's literal. It's not poetic. It's technical. It means her world really exploded, meaning her world came to a tragic end. So poetry cloud, eventually Liu Cixin used very technical literal language to describe this cloud which contains all the possible poems that has been written and that will be written, all the possible poems that could have existed. He had to, I thought that perhaps he needed as Li Bai He or as the the creator id had to use up all the energies of the universe, but no, he only used up the energy of the solar system for the convenience of Liu Cixin's story, the scope. So it's still observable from the earth. So the remains of the earth and the poetry cloud formed the spectacle, really the spectacle of this story. But what's so pitiful is that even so, this super intelligent alien creature who called himself Li Bai, even gave himself, now he's no longer a circle or a ball or a kind of a whatever shape. Now he gave himself the virtual body as Li Bai. And we are facing this virtual cloud of poetry. Remember, this was written 20 years ago, before we are familiar with this kind of database. So it's very much inventive. But the story ends with something ambiguous, because even if this fake Li Bai, this virtual Li Bai, could create all the possible poems only in Chinese, not even in German, sorry, only in Chinese, not in English, not in German, only in Chinese. But he could not have this is German, the great Immanuel Kant called the judgment. He does not have the judgment about what he wrote is good or not. He has to keep that poor or lucky or very funny vernacular Chinese poet who pretended to be a specialist of classical poetry alive, because as a non-human, he could not judge whether what he wrote is a good poem or a bad poem, or a poem that appears to be good, but actually very bad. Think of Emperor Kangxi, think of Emperor Qianlong, who wrote so many poems. Well, Emperor Qianlong may know that he wrote were nonsense. I don't know. Okay. So this is what jumped to my mind immediately after reading your email. So, however, I cannot really go, really too deeper into this, because this story shows what I call really a battle between the technological determinism and the human agency. And that forms the core of Liu Cixin's epic novel, the Three Body series, which is about, by the way, the Three Body trilogy, translated into German or in every volume, also translated into 30 languages in the world. This trilogy is about Liu Cixin created this, of course, based on the Cultural Revolution. It started from the Cultural Revolution, based on the madness years of the amoral Maoist revolution. He created what he calls the dark forest scenario. What is dark forest? Dark forest is that in the dark forest, when we come to like Zygmunt Bauman's The Moral Party of Two, for Liu Cixin, it's really about you are either my enemy or you must be my enemy. You have to be enemy. You either defeat me or I defeat you. So this is an amoral universe. But in this, he also created a woman which his readers disliked, his Chinese readers disliked, called him a soft heart bitch. I think that's the word they used. 圣母婊. Yeah. Eventually, but I think Liu Cixin, I eventually I thought Liu Cixin's text should be understood as non-binary, because eventually it's revealed this woman has a poetic heart. And is this poetic heart, this woman is even a poet eventually. Is her poetic heart that could balance the cold, dark forest of the entire universe, whatever super intelligence that wipe up galaxies by galaxies. She has a poetic heart, so she could write. And what eventually we read, the text we read is her words. So her words are the final testimony to the human strength, even though humanity was completely destroyed eventually. Okay, so Liu Cixin is really, really fascinating, a great writer. And when Zhiyi asked me to change my title, I thought, okay, just by thinking about Liu Cixin, actually, his texts are filled with classicism, lyricism, and Liu Cixin, as a computer scientist, he used the very technical literal language, and he created what he called the macro details, which is like a scientific marvels, but he reserved a soft place that's for poetry. And in his novels, the poetic moments, there are many poetic moments. Okay, now let's talk about, I should use this, right? Yeah. I do not need to show all the, maybe a couple of slides is enough, even though I prepared a lot. Okay, when we talk about science fiction, we think science fiction is about the future. But according to the British scholar Adam Roberts, who wrote History of Science Fiction, he believed actually science fiction, we know science fiction is a modern genre, but he believed the science fiction, actually, of course, science fiction also created in the German-speaking area, I mean, by Mary Shelley, and Frankenstein's castle is close to here, right? No? Romania. It's Romania. Oh, okay. All right. But anyway, the genre was really modern, but Adam Roberts thought science fiction actually heavily borrowed the narrative strategies from historical fiction. So if we think about Star Wars, it was, I believe perhaps you're familiar with Asimov's Foundation. And what inspired Asimov to write Foundation is Gibbon's the fall and decline of the Roman Empire. It's a historical narrative that inspired Asimov to create his masterpiece Foundation series. And the Star Wars is it's not about future. It's not a long time in the future. It starts with a long time ago, right? So it's like to give you the narrative about the past instead of a narrative about the future. So that's often used in science fiction. So in science fiction, it's about the future. Usually it's about the future, but that future has arrived. So that future, so we become the ancient. We become the ancient people to the characters in science fiction writings. So now I want to give you just some very interesting example. Okay, I found this picture of Sir Arthur C. Clarke, because he was asked if he's gay, but he said no, I'm just merely slightly I forgot the term, but he was asked if he's gay, but he said I'm only slightly cheerful something. So he's very happy. He lived a long life. In the middle of the 20th century, he wrote a short story. This story is about archaeology. So archaeology is part of my title. So how archaeology and futurology can be almost the same in science fiction is a very interesting paradox. So in this story, Star, has anyone read this story, Star? Nobody? Okay, it's really a long time ago, this story is about, of course, about the future, because it's about long distance interstellar travel. And this is about Jesuit. It's about a Jesuit as this kind of like a head scientist on this spaceship is a Jesuit priest, but he's also a scientist. They went to, I even use the past term now. They traveled a long time. They arrived at the ruins of a supernova. Their mission was to investigate this supernova kind of like a phenomena, this afterbirth of a supernova. And they discovered, actually, when this supernova happened, there was a very prosperous civilization on the planet nearby. So their job was to dig, like Professor Wang Fansen said. They were like they are like the future Dong Zuobin of the Chinese archaeologists. So they are digging on that planet, trying to unearth a lot of ancient artifacts. And their conclusion is that it's such a splendid civilization, and it was destroyed by this supernova. But this turned out to be a fatal blow to this Jesuit scientist, because only he knew, and he knew what this mission is about. That supernova was the star of Bethlehem. Bethlehem. How to pronounce it in? You know what I mean. Yeah, you know what I mean. Yes. Okay. So it is the star of Bethlehem. Yeah. And he was very miserable. The novel ended with his self-reflection and thought on the purpose of the universe and the purpose of religion. And he said, "Oh God, there are so many stars you could have used. What was the need to give these people to the fire, that the symbol of their passing might shine above Bethlehem?" Yeah. So in this story, the scientist, this future scientist, is an archaeologist. And what he dug up is actually, this is the antiquity. It's related to classicism in Western context. And this is just one example from one of the great English science fiction writer. I usually actually give them alphabets A, B, C, D, like A as Asimov, B as Bradbury, C as Clarke. So he's number 3, the Arthur C. Clarke. Now let's turn to Bao Shu. Bao Shu studied in, I don't think he studied in German-speaking area, but he studied in Belgium. maybe German was the language that he studied. His major is philosophy, and he eventually became a science fiction writer. He gave up his PhD on philosophy. He wrote a lot of stories that could not be published in China. But this story, Distant Sounds of the Earth, that I had translated into English and published in the anthology, is another story. It's a story kind of that's a little bit like a star. This time is about the future, really future, the distant future. Human beings, of course, they are all Chinese. Maybe not everyone is Chinese, but we have a few Chinese names that do not appear usually in Clark's novel. Okay, I see. A few Chinese people mingled with other people. They are approaching kind of very bright star, because that bright star has a strange behavior. That star sends out waves across the galaxy, and those waves very, very strong. And then eventually, when their spacecraft gets closer to that star, it's a Sansuar. It's a very bright star, the eighth brightest star in the sky. Eventually, they realize these are sounds. These are music. It's the music coming from the star. It's waves of music coming out of the star. How come a star is broadcasting music at the center of the universe? Of course, we know every place can be the center of the universe, because it draws all these scientists toward it. It's a little bit like Alien, the film Alien, broadcasts the sound. Okay, in Bao Shu's story, those distant sounds broadcast by this bright star turned out, after archaeological work done on the nearby planet, this future human in diaspora in the universe, they realized that actually those sounds are from ancient Chinese sounds. So really, really ancient Chinese sounds. And it turns out that who is converted by those songs? The songs, let's say the book of songs. Let's say the songs. The song has some effect, upon the human emotion, effective on, in changing human behavior, lyricism, right? Yeah. Anyway, it turned out the I narrator of this story is a machine. By that moment, we finally understood that we are reading the narrative presented by an artificial intelligence, and her name is Athena. Why is her called Athena? I don't know. But you see the encounter between the Western mythology and the Chinese poetry. Okay. Eventually, it is this Athena who is converted by these songs. And she single-handedly decided, without letting any humans on the ship know it, she decided to crash their spaceship to create a chain of actions in that star system to cause planet dropping into the star one by one to trigger a supernova. So it's really, again, the supernova phenomenon. And that, in that way, it will broadcast, when the supernova happens, it will broadcast all the sounds. It's like a cosmic concert. It will broadcast all the sounds into the deep space. Okay, we don't know what will happen later, and because our narrator stopped, our narrator the narrator already said, I'm going to do it. Okay, so again, another story about archaeology and futurology. And I don't think I should just tell you stories. I have another story, but this is too complicated. It's about tombs. Again, it's about archaeology, excavation, and with Lu Xun, this eventually refers to Buddhism and very ancient classical Chinese concepts, things like that. But I think I will skip this. It's a little bit too complicated to explain. Now I'm going to talk about something that is, now we're talking about science fiction's, my new interpretation of science fiction. In 2010, I attended a major conference, and that's the first time Chinese science fiction began to be known to people who never read science fiction before. So it's the moment when science fiction began to emerge on the surface. At that conference, Fei Dao, at that time, he's very young. He's still very young, but at that time, he was even younger. He was only in his early 20s. So he told a story at the conference that when he was there to present, he used that opportunity to tell a story. This story is about science fiction. He said science fiction is like a lonely hidden army, 寂寞的伏兵. And this lonely hidden army could be there without, nobody saw them, then they disappeared. So in the future, maybe in the distant future, it's possible in the future people will excavate some mysterious weapons from where the army was once hidden. They will have no clue who invented these weapons or used them. It's like how we piece together the past. So what Fei Dao did, of course, is this description is like science fiction story, like the story I just told you, like Clark's star or Bao Shu's distant sounds of the earth. But Fei Dao's purpose is to show that science fiction could disappear in China because in 1983, science fiction was banned, literally banned by the Chinese government. When science fiction was denied the legitimacy either as a scientific writing or as literary writing. So at that time, there was a debate about whether science fiction should be surnamed literature or science fiction surnamed science. Neither community accepted science fiction. And science fiction was eventually named as one of the spiritual pollution. In 1983 in China, there was an anti-spiritual pollution campaign that made scar literature disappear, that made science fiction disappear. Why science fiction was considered dangerous to the regime? I think science fiction is about the future. If it's a good science fiction story, it usually involves uncertainty. It evolved, when the new scientific knowledge was about to enter China in 1985, Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time was translated into Chinese and became very popular. And Fang Lizhi, the president of 中国科技大学, he's a scientist, but later he's also a political dissident. He also wrote popular science book. I read Fang Lizhi's book when I was a kid, and I did not know Fang Lizhi was political. Okay. Basically, the new sciences were dangerous. The Chinese government used new sciences to create like nuclear power or whatever, but the new scientific theories are dangerous because they have dismantled the stabilizing Newtonian universe. They have destabled all the scientific rules that the Chinese took for granted, and it's even surpassed like the let's see, evolutionary thinking, things like that. So there's no linear teleological structure of the scientific narrative at that time. So science fiction already opened the door. For example, Zheng Wenguang, he's an astrophysicist and also a science fiction writer. He wrote a story titled Mirror of the Earth. And that story is as much political as scientific. It is about some Chinese astronauts discovered the mirror image of the Earth. It's just only on Earth time flows in this direction. On that planet, time flows in the other direction. So, well, this story was written right after the Cultural Revolution. So what would you expect to see? So in that story, people got back to Cultural Revolution, and even got all back to the Qin Empire, burying scholars, burning books. So that story has very sharp social criticism. When science fiction, eventually re-emerged in about 1999, when Liu Cixin published his first 4 stories in 1 year. That's like the Big Bang. And the other writers published the stories that created what I call the underground, the underground fire. Let's see, the underground fire of Chinese science fiction, 地火, was running for 10 years. Nobody knew of it. And the science fiction circle, they were very cautious. They did not want other people to know too much about it. So Liu Cixin wrote The Three-Body Problem in 2006, and no publisher wanted to publish it because it's about the Cultural Revolution. It started with a very graphic description of the amoral universe, coming up to moist thought. And Liu Cixin translated that amoral or immoral, truly immoral, anti-moral, anti-human scenario into the dark forest on the astronomical scale. The entire universe is like a moist, divine comedy. In the beginning, no publisher wanted to publish it because they said, this is crazy. And in that story, also it involves, and do you know what's Liu Cixin's first science fiction about? He wrote his first science fiction in 1989. I know it's broadcast, so I cannot say too much. In 1989, you all know what happened in 1989. Liu Cixin wrote this novel. He actually, I checked with him. He told me that he wrote it before that thing. Okay, before what you know. Anyway, that novel, but I really think he later made many changes, revisions. He had the idea before that happened, but that novel is certainly about a futuristic Chinese government, or really a democracy. And this democracy was administered by the young people, like the president of the future China. In the novel is called China 2185. China 2185, the president of China was a 25-year-old young woman. But by that time, Mao's body would still be there in the Tiananmen Square. But the Tiananmen Square was deserted. It was like a forest. Nobody went there anymore. People were tired of that monumental memory of the communist past. So it's like a 杂草丛生. It's like a wilderness. But a young scientist, after his pure curiosity, went there to digitize a brain cell of Chairman Mao and turned it into a virus. I mean, not a virus like a pandemic, the COVID-19, but a virus in the cyber world. Okay, anyway. So Liu Cixin's first novel could not be published. Later, you could not even find it now. At one time, a Taiwan publisher asked me, "Can you talk to Liu Cixin? We really want to publish his China 2185." And the three-body, all the major plotline of the three-body trilogy appeared in that novel, like how a universe could be created, and eventually how the dark forest scenario could appear. It's already there. So that's the hidden origin of this new wave. But for stories like that, they did not want other people to know. That's why for Fei Dao coming to talk to really, the audience filled with the literary celebrities like Mo Yan, like all the major writers, Yu Hua, Wang Yi, and hundreds of journal editors and hundreds of scholars, old and young. He's very cautious. He described science fiction as a lonely hidden army, invisible to our world. And this science fiction could be only known in the future as the past. So he defined science fiction in that sense. Science fiction should be a genre for a subject for the work of archaeologists, not you people, the literary scholars. But anyway, this is like the moment, the boom. Suddenly, people were all interested in science fiction in that year. I take away a lot of things from this. Sorry, I should use this. Okay. There are many, you don't need to read this. Okay, I can summarize very simply. First, I take it that science fiction has been invisible as a literary genre in China. If we look back at the history of Chinese science fiction, it had 3 or 4 short-lived booms, but basically it's always on the margin. Professor David Wang wrote about it, Professor Chen Mingyuan wrote about it. Scholars paid attention to late Qing science fiction, but late Qing science fiction was nothing interesting to read. Today, people never read the late Qing science fiction for fun. We only read it as a scholarly work. Truly, just like Fei Dao said, science fiction became the artifact the scholars discovered, and it's like the work of archaeologist. If David Wang and we, the scholars, are like a literary archaeologist, science fiction was our work, but not for the common readers. So it's invisible in this sense. But there's also a technical part, is that science fiction is invisible in the sense that science fiction is invisible because of its technological part that made it very hard to understand in a kind of context of everyday life. So if you try to understand a science fiction novel, you have to think in a fold. Truly, you have to fold your thinking. You have to think counterintuitively. Otherwise, a good science fiction story is very difficult to be understood. Okay, and also aesthetically, is the third part, is that I consider the invisible is a key feature of the poetics of this genre, because later I develop. This you have fear of seeing. That's the cover. Fear of seeing. Eventually, in fear of seeing, I created this poetics of science fiction. I know it's almost 7. To summarize, is okay. You can ignore this, but all these are very interesting questions. But anyway, you can still ignore it. It's about, like, if we follow the modern sciences, we should understand the fabric of our reality is not what it appears to be. If we follow quantum physics, whatever. Interestingly, more than 100 years ago, it's in Germany, the Prussian scientists made this challenge to the Newtonian universe to change how we understand the fabric of the reality. And later because I think Liu Cixin really mattered. Liu Cixin is so important for science fiction in the sense that my former advisor, Professor David Wang, when he tried to promote science fiction, he gave a lecture at the Beijing University titled 从鲁迅到刘慈欣. But for him, it's just from Liu Cixin to Liu Cixin. But I did ask a question, can we read A Madman's Diary as science fiction? And to do that, actually, I did a lot of research trying to understand what Liu Cixin knew about the German scientific theories concerning the electromagnetism and concerning the chemistry and concerning eventually the physics. And the answer is just there, so obvious, because in 1902, Liu Cixin was barely 22, barely 21. He published 说博. And in 说博, if you read 说博, actually there are, I'm sorry, I have to find the right document. Anyway, I cannot find it, sorry. Well, I need to find it, I cannot find it. But he wrote he used really the language like 庄子, but it's like it describes the 电子之明灭. It's really about something mysteriously scientific and mysterious scientific in the sense that Liu Cixin cannot present that scientific theory in the archaic Chinese, classical Chinese. So it appears like almost really like 庄子, but it's about the modern sciences. And there's another route that is among Lu Xun, just inside Lu Xun's circle, very close circle, there was you all know Xia Zhengyou. Well, Xia Zhengyou was a very famous Liqing reformer. He and Yan Fu promoted the new fiction back in 1898. 商务印书馆译印小说选序 1897 maybe, yeah. Xia Zhengyou had an elder son named Xia Yuanli. And Xia Yuanli was the first Chinese student to study quantum physics with Max Planck. And he returned to China in 1913. At that time, Yan Fu was the president of Beijing University, and Yan Fu was a good friend of Xia Zhengyou, Xia Yuanli's father. So Xia is very like the network. Xia Yuanli got a job teaching physics at Beijing University. And soon Cai Yuanpei became the president. And under Cai Yuanpei, Chen Duxiu became the chief of the dean of the humanities, 文科学长. And Xia Yuanli became the dean of the sciences, 理科学长. So Mr. Democracy and Mr. Science are not, nowadays we study Lu Xun, we only study evolutionary theory, but Mr. Science already includes quantum physics. Because Xia Yuanli contributed to Xin Qingnian and many new magazines, and he wrote about quantum physics as like a 原量论. And he used not quantum physics, but he used his own terms in the classical Chinese. And he translated Einstein's general theory of relativity. He first wrote about Einstein's theory, and then he translated Einstein's theory, and he invited Einstein to visit China. So, okay. So what I want to see is that the fabric of reality was changed 100 years ago, a century ago, and Lu Xun, before Lu Xun became the founding father of modern Chinese literature, Lu Xun was actually an avid reader of science fiction. His first publications were all about either sciences or science fiction. He translated Jules Verne's novels. He translated a Boston-based woman writer. Actually, we only recently dug up about her because she's obviously much less famous than Lu Xun, Louis J. Strong. And she wrote children's literature, but she wrote one story titled An Unscientific Story, published in Hearst, the Cosmopolitan. And that story was translated by Lu Xun into Chinese. And that story contains cannibalism, contains children, contains the metaphor of an enclosed space. Lu Xun did not read the entire story. There's no proof that Lu Xun read the entire story. Lu Xun translated second-hand from the Japanese. And it looks like Lu Xun only knew part of it. But we do not know because the Japanese translation was complete. The Japanese translation was rather faithful. The unscientific story is about how science could replace women as the human makers, but that's amoral. Basically, this is this woman's idea. She's anti the scientific experiment. But it's like today when we talk about Cologne, you know. But what's so interesting is that when Lu Xun translated this story in 1906, Zhou Zuoren, his younger brother, wrote commentary, and that created an antithesis about this story. I asked Carlos, invited Carlos Rojas to translate Lu Xun's translation back into English to be printed together with Louis J. Strong's story. I just want to say there are paths, secret paths, hidden paths, invisible paths in our scholarship that we never even look at. The answer is there, so clear. We all know Chen Duxiu is the dean of the humanities. Who is the dean of the science? And where did this dean of science study? Who did he study with? He studied with Max Planck, the person who created the quantum physics. So when we think about all of this, 100 years later, when this new wave science fiction emerged, it's no wonder they did not recognize any writer, any science fiction writer before them, not Wu Jianren, not Hai Tian Du Xiaozi or 闭合馆主人 as their model. They recognized Lu Xun as their I shouldn't say role model. They recognized Lu Xun as the person who influenced them the most. So this new wave science fiction truly came from Lu Xun's tradition, not just the reflection on the human condition, social criticism, but scientific tradition as well. The scientific theory as a fold and the Lu Xun's very sophisticated thinking as a fold too are combined in this new wave science fiction. So this is my some of my idea. I know this is not what you want, but I have to just present here. I consider science fictionality in the 21st century in China has become a new sense of literalness, because in the recent years, because of the impact of Liu Cixin, we begin to see a lot of major writers begin to have a sense of science fictionality in their writings. Even Wang Yi. Wang Yi in 2015, she wrote the novel 匿名, anonymous. And in 匿名, she often zoomed out. She has moments of zooming up into the deep space to look at the Earth. She described, she suddenly has the position in the after space to look at the Earth. And she often uses metaphors of a dinosaur, but like birds. She says birds are dinosaurs. Things like that. She inserts a lot of scientific terms in it, but we can say it's superficial. But when in 2019, when Wang Yi wrote 考工记, 考工记, of course, is not science fiction, but 考工记, if you know Wang Yi wrote 长恨歌, the song of everlasting sorrow, is about Shanghai as a woman. But in 2019, she rewrote the Shanghai story, and this time, Shanghai is not human, even though there's a male character, but the male character is nobody. The male character's main function in the novel is to guard this house. So Shanghai as a thing, as a house, and the house as a thing that has a inherent, vibrant life. So Ouyang Jianghe, the poet Ouyang Jianghe, and a lot of other poets began to write science fiction poetry, like the most recent book, poetry collection by Ouyang Jianghe is called 宿命与量子男孩, Destiny and the Quantum Boy. And I don't know how much Ouyang Jianghe knows about the quantum physics, but the quantum physics terminology become part of the. Well, Ouyang Jianghe is one of the most important poets in China. And Zhai Yongming wrote entire book of poems recycling the images from American science fiction TV drama, like Dolores. You don't know who is Dolores. Dolores is the robot girl in Westworld. Yeah. So Zhai Yongming is the most famous female poet in China. So science fiction has become a new sense of literalness. And science fiction reshapes the relationship between reality and representation in the sense that science fiction comes from the fold of this idea which does not need the reality. It could go before the real happens. And gender, genre, Baroque, that I will save for Heidelberg. Sorry, I will not talk about that part. Okay. Yes, you already see this. Can we read A Madman's Diary as science fiction? Is a thought experiment? Is my archaeology? Is my archaeology of science fiction as a literature? And if we connect Han Song and Lu Xun, we see the same fear of seeing. What is fear of seeing? Okay. In Han Song stories, there's often a moment when the protagonist, usually a journalist like Han Song himself, is facing a difficult choice. That is, if he does something, he will see the truth of the world. The truth is terrifying. Or he can stay in the very comforting appearance of the reality. Well, of course, we choose the dangerous route, right? So it's always choosing, it's like red pill, a blue pill. You choose red pill, like Neo in Matrix. And what does the madman do? The madman does the same. The madman lives in a very comforting kind of a well-to-do family in Confucian China, but he chooses to see the world in a different way. And he sees the virtue. He reads between the lines. That's not part of the appearance of reality. He sees between the lines, sees what is virtually non-existent but truthful. But that's fearful to see. Okay. These are just my little, but we don't, I really want to tell you this. I really want to tell you, I want to end with this. Actually, this is one of the stories that I read rather early, and it's called On the River Miluo. Miluojiang is a place where the very famous ancient poet Qu Yuan jumped to death, committed suicide. And this science fiction story written by Xia Jia, she studied physics actually, and later she became a science fiction writer. People, just because of her gender, people thought she's a so-called soft science fiction writer, even portrait science fiction writer, 西范科幻作家. I thought it's really insulting, because her science fiction stories has science in it. She has the scientific background. Anyway, in this story, she invented a term called T-mail. It's not email, it's T-mail. You can write emails to a different time. The mission is to actually, 2007, there's a very famous unknown science fiction writer, Liu Wenxiang, ended his life really, really early at the age of 37. And that had a tremendous impact on Xia Jia. So Xia Jia's story is to send T-mail to a recently deceased science fiction writer. And in the T-mails, actually, she and he experimented with a virtual project that is to go back to the moment before Qu Yuan wanted to kill himself. They went back there in the virtual appearance of some strange guy many, many times. It's really, really fun to read this. And I noticed that recently in Warring States cyberpunk, the back to classicism science fiction, there is a Qu Yuan as a cyborg. Okay, I think that even though this is not Chinese science fiction, it's a Chinese-American science fiction, but I think that it really tells us, even though science fiction is a genre about the future, we need classicism to understand it. Not just that, we also actually see in the nature of science fiction not just the future, mainly the past. And the past that's hidden from us or technically impossible for us to see clearly. So science fiction can be the magnifier to illuminate this invisible past and to show it to us. Yeah, what else? Oh, that's New Baroque. Okay, New Baroque is for Heidelberg. Yeah. Okay, thank you.